live on WFLA Now. With a specialized degree in climate, Chief Meteorologist and Climate Specialist Jeff Berardelli is pioneering the way we look at climate and extreme weather. Welcome to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by ArmorView Window and Door.
We are talking about a topic that is generating a ton of interest. I mean, there are articles in just about every newspaper, and when I say newspaper, I actually mean digital, that I can think of. So this is, should we add a Category 6 to our Saffir-Simpson scale? Because hurricanes are, in fact, getting stronger. We have plenty of evidence to back that up. But still, with that said, it's a very controversial topic. So what I want to do at this moment is bring in my two guests today. First, the lead scientist of this particular paper, which has generated all of this interest, Dr. Michael Wehner. He's the senior scientist at Berkeley Lab. Dr. Wehner, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me back.
You have created quite a ruckus.
Yes, he has.
In the meteorology and climate circles.
Yes, indeed.
And now we're about to create a ruckus in public circles, too, because it's on our Facebook page and on our webpage, and we're asking people to weigh in. So make sure you go to our Facebook page, WFLA, Facebook page, and if you want to post a comment or a question, do so. And my other guest is our very own Val Simpson. She's both a weather anchor, but also she is climate curious. She's always asking me lots of questions about climate all the time, and so this is an education for her, but she always has very insightful questions on the climate.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, it's truly an honor to be today joining you guys in this climate classroom with Dr. Wehner. I know that we're going to have a lot of questions, so I am ready with my notebook, but I'll also be monitoring all of our audience's questions as well. So yes, if you are on Facebook right now, leave your questions, and hopefully Jeff and Dr. Wehner will be able to answer them for you.
Yes, and I'll also say that Val has something at her disposal that if myself and Dr. Wehner get too geeky, too scientific.
This is my trusty buzzer, everybody.
That's right. That shuts us up immediately.
Yes, that's right.
When Val says, you guys are going way off on a tangent here, and I'm not accepting that.
We need to scale it down. I'll keep you accountable.
That is almost certain to happen.
I'm sure it will, because I really love getting into the weeds. So first things first, I want to show you this. This is Hurricane Lee. It did not, in fact, Hurricane Lee was up for a second, and now it's gone. But Hurricane Lee was not, in fact, a category, what would have been considered a Category 6. It was a Category 5. But Dr. Wehner, what's going on is that we're seeing storms that get stronger than they used to. So what I want you to do is kind of give me a little bit of scientific foundation for why you might write a paper and propose the possibility of at least talking about a Category 6 added to the scale.
Well, this idea of a Category 6 has actually been around for quite a while, mainly in the blogosphere. And after Typhoon Haiyan, there was a paper suggesting it was a Category 6. And so what our goal was to raise awareness that, we understand that in a warmer world, there's more available energy. And when you get one of these big storms, it's generally a perfect storm and able to use most of the energy that's available. And so with an increase in energy, you'd expect an increase in intensities. And our goal was to try to take some of these ideas that have been kicking around and do rigorous analysis, get some peer review, which we went through a lot of that, I might add, and bring the idea up for discussion. And so we deliberately called it a hypothetical Category 6 because neither Jim Costin, my co-author, or I felt we should be in a position to tell the National Hurricane Center, for instance, what to do. That's not our role. We can talk more about the details of whether a Cat 6 is good or bad in terms of adding it, but we just wanted to put that idea out there to stimulate the discussion and raise awareness about the fact that climate change has made the most dangerous storms more dangerous.
I want to blow up your ego just a little bit, if I can, because you and Jim Costin are really the premier experts at the intersection of climate and hurricanes. You do a lot of research on this. And so one thing that I noted in your paper is that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the only 5 storms that would have qualified as a theoretical Cat 6 with winds of 192 miles an hour or greater have all occurred in the last 9 years of the 40-year record. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, and that's sort of an indication that things have changed. Now, Jim and I consider ourselves to be cautious, conservative climate scientists, and that alone is not really convincing evidence, to the standard that climate scientists would demand. And so we looked at 2 other lines of evidence, one of which, and this is where the buzzer's going to come,
I'm getting ready.
Is called potential intensity. And this is basically a theoretical speed limit on how high the winds can be, given the large-scale environmental conditions. This was an idea that's been around for about 20 years, introduced by Kerry Emanuel, who is one of my role models from MIT. And it's proven to be a pretty accurate description of the most intense winds in these perfect storms.
Listen, I want to prevent Val from buzzing you, so I'm just going to jump in for a second. Basically, what it says is, given the water temperatures and a perfect environment, what is the potential highest max intensity sustained winds that a hurricane could achieve? Is that right?
Yes, and like I said, it's proven to be very useful. And so we looked at that quantity, and we looked at it over the satellite period, which is 1980 to now. And we found that that there's a trend in, we defined this category 6 as 192 miles an hour. And our detection and attribution metric was the number of days per year that this speed limit would be exceeded. And we found that there's a significant trend. There were basically no days in 1980 and a lot of days now. Wow. And
what's a lot of days? And you're talking about globally, right?
Globally, some places almost a month.
Wow. So 0 days in 1980, but a month now. That it could have potentially become a Cat 6.
In the Western Pacific. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's like 2 weeks maybe.
Wow.
But it exists, and it didn't exist before, and that's because of a warming world.
That's because of the warming world. And so we then use climate models to look at the world that was and the world that might have been had humans not changed the climate, to rule out natural variability, natural causes. And so we made a formal attribution statement that this increase in the risk of Category 6 storms was caused by climate change and the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil. And
something that did catch my attention, especially living here in Tampa, is that you said that the Gulf of Mexico had the greatest risk of experiencing a potential Category 6 storm. So why is that? Why are you saying that we have the greatest potential here at home?
The greatest risk for
the Atlantic
along
basin.
the U.S. coastline.
Yeah.
There's a much greater risk actually in the Western Pacific, and indeed, these 4 of the 5 storms that would have been Category 6 were in the Western Pacific. And as I mentioned, Typhoon Haiyan in 2013 was the first and the most devastating, killing thousands of people, impacting millions, and causing billions of dollars in damages in the Philippines. The most intense storm was in the Eastern Pacific, and that was Hurricane Patricia with a peak wind speed of 214 miles an hour, Jeff and Val. I mean, which is really hard to believe. That's faster than most racing cars. I mean, it's just, it's hard to comprehend. Fortunately, that storm weakened before it made landfall on Baja California and Mexico to only Cat 4, which is still, but not as heavily populated area, densely populated area as Haiyan
Jeff,
impact.
I was looking at one of those graphics that you were showing us just a moment ago.
Yeah, I'm putting it up.
Because I do want, I don't know if you can explain this a little bit better.
Well, it's going to disappear in a second by the time. Yeah, it'll come back up. I have it on a loop, Dr. Wehner. So next time it comes up, I'm going to interrupt you because I want you to talk about it. It's only going to be up for 10 seconds at the most. One of the graphics that folks are going to see pretty soon is how, and I think it's going to come up in just a couple of seconds, is the trend in the Gulf of Mexico temperature. Since 1980, it's gone up around 2 degrees Fahrenheit. You can kind of see around 1980 or 1990, it was flat, but then all of a sudden it rises. And this year, of course, it was something like,
There it is.
over a degree Celsius, so about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And then there are the scenarios, Dr. Wehner.
Yeah, these are the changes in the number of days per year that the Cat 6 speed limit is reached under a 1.5 and 2 degree global warming level targets. These are the Paris Agreement targets. And then the 3 degrees and 4 degree warming levels. The 3 degree is sort of what many scientists, I wouldn't say most, many scientists believe is where we'll be at the end of the century.
I have to call out Amanda Holly,
that's-
one of the meteorologists here, because she realized that this graphic was going to leave, and she jumped on the computer really quickly.
That's right.
And stopped it from just cycling through. So Amanda,
Can we do a congratulations buzzer? We'll do a buzzer.
Let's do a buzzer for Amanda. Nice job. That means we think you're doing well, Amanda. So
you're doing amazing.
In fact, so
that was a good buzzer.
That was a good buzzer.
I've never had a good buzzer before. Amanda's the award recipient of the first good buzzer that I've had in my show.
We're going to initiate that.
So I want to mention something really quickly, and that is that meteorologists, almost all of them, think that we shouldn't have a Cat 6. And let me just say why. And I don't necessarily fall in either category here. I do understand that we want to raise awareness that hurricanes are getting stronger. I think that's important. So I think you actually achieved a pretty big goal, which is getting everyone talking about it and making people aware, hey, hurricanes are getting stronger. And as a hurricane gets stronger, the destructive potential of that hurricane doesn't just go up linearly, it goes up exponentially, meaning it can cause a lot more damage just by the winds going up a little bit. So a couple of things I want to bring up. Number one, almost universally, meteorologists don't think it's a good idea. And that's mainly because it's not just wind, right, that power that makes a hurricane impactful. It's also the water. It's also the population density. It's also the vulnerability in terms of socioeconomic reasons. It's the contours of the coast. It's how deep the water is offshore. I could go on, right? Dr. Wehner, I'll just have you chime in on this. I'm assuming you agree with that.
We do, actually, and we strongly agree, in fact, that we think that, the Saffir-Simpson scale is really inadequate. Any single number is inadequate to convey the nuanced and detailed information that people need. Now, you're in a position, to make those provide that kind of information. And I think maybe the broadcast meteorologists can do this better than the print ones, who tend to seem to focus on the Saffir-Simpson scale. But these products from the National Hurricane Center that are very good, and both verbal descriptions and maps, particularly, are ones that can be used by both the media and individuals by going to the Hurricane Center's website and finding out for themselves, what sort of the risk of, say, storm surge. As you mentioned, water is a much bigger, floodwaters are a much bigger source of hazard than wind damage. The storm surge, the saltwater flooding from the wind blowing the water up the coast, or the inland flooding from the rainfall. And this is the kind of information that people really need. They don't really need to know what the Saffir-Simpson scale is to take action for an impending storm.
Right.
But the Saffir-Simpson scale is a convenient, because it's so well known and possibly misinterpreted.
That's right.
But a convenient metric for conveying this longer term danger of more intense storms. And so we completely agree with these suggestions that no, Cat 6 is a bad idea.
Well, that's too bad, because I was going to suggest a steel cage match between you and meteorologists. So that's because that would have been very entertaining.
No, but it wouldn't have been, actually. They would have beat me up pretty quick.
They would have been.
So Val, I'm assuming you must have a question or two.
Yes.
That is coming from a viewer. There was something that I did want to weigh in on a little bit, which is the destructive potential. So I think people don't understand this. You take a storm with winds of 75 miles an hour. You compare it directly to a storm with winds of 150 miles an hour. You might think to yourself, the damage is going to double, and maybe in a perfect world, the damage will quadruple. But actually, it's 250 times the amount of damage. So damage potential increases exponentially. And these numbers are according to NOAA. I'm not just making these numbers up. And you may disagree, Dr. Wehner, with the scale of those numbers. But I'm just trying to get across a point. And I would say this. So in 2010, and this was brought to my attention by Dr. Jeff Masters, who writes for Yale, And he had a great article, and Dr. Wehner, I'm not sure if you read it, but basically he talked about how the Tampa Bay Resiliency Council, or whatever it was, back in 2010 did a scenario for the Tampa Bay area. If a Cat 5 with winds of 160 miles an hour made landfall, it would cause $250 billion worth of damage. To give you something to compare it to, Ian caused like 110 or 120 billion dollars worth of damage. So Tampa would see maybe double that. That's what they guesstimate or estimate, right? But if you go by the NOAA scale, if the winds go from 160 miles an hour to 190 miles an hour hitting the Tampa Bay area, the damage goes from 250 billion to $1 trillion. So small increases in wind make a big difference. Now, again, I know you're probably not going to agree with the numbers that I threw out there exactly. I got them directly off the NOAA page, but it's something I wanted to bring up to our viewers and why it matters.
Well, those are astonishing numbers. And fortunately, we have not had such a storm. And,
That's right.
maybe if we're lucky, we won't ever have one. But I think, one of the wind scale is what it is. It's just the wind. And, like we said, the storm surge and the rainfall can be very different from one Category 5 storm to another, for instance. The size can be very different. A good example is Hurricane Camille in 1969 was a very compact Category 5 storm. Hurricane Katrina was a very large storm, and so the damages were much larger. But I think it's fair to say that, certainly the rainfall from a Category 5 storm is going to, or a Category 6 storm is going to be more than a Category 5 storm. And if the tracks were the same, so that the angle that the trajectory of the storm takes with the coastline is the same, then the stronger the winds, the more the storm surge. So, there is sort of a place, I guess, for the Saffir-Simpson scale, but I think it's far too prominent, at least in the print media. We spent a lot of time writing this article. It took forever. And so there were a bunch of hurricanes that happened while we were writing it. And so we spent a lot of time, we were keen on this and keenly aware of this controversy that we were going to stir up the pot on whether a Saffir-Simpson scale is any good or not. And particularly for Hurricane Ian, it seemed that, most of the print media was like, it's a Category 3 storm this, it's a Category 3 storm that, and didn't focus on these other products that inform much more usefully, like the storm surge, for instance, which was
terrible, yeah.
But this idea of communicating to the public is complex. There was a National Academies workshop actually this week, coincidentally.
You're going to get buzzed on that. I'm telling you. If you go into details on this, Val is going to buzz you.
No.
She did. She buzzed you. I knew it was going to happen.
I'm buzzing. 1 second though. I do have a question because I don't want to skip this subject. We're on it. It's from Anthony DiClemente. His question is on Facebook, and it says, when was the last time that the Saffir-Simpson scale got changed or upgraded?
I don't think it ever was.
No, it was changed.
It was changed.
Yeah, it
when
changed around in the early 2000s. And the original scale actually did have information about flooding in it. And the National Hurricane Center removed that and made it a wind-only scale in the early.
I don't remember that. Wow.
2000s. And I'm not sure entirely all the reasons for that. I guess it wasn't as useful as it might have been. Certainly simpler when it's just the wind scale.
I do have another question. I think that this one is worth mentioning. It's from James L. Howell Jr. What other precautions are there going to be issued for that 6 that wasn't issued for a 5? I guess he's trying to figure out warnings or advisors.
The argument against adding a Category 6 is that a Category 5 is going to pretty much destroy everything if that made landfall. In fact, one of the things that we noticed, like I mentioned, that Hurricane Center has all these graphical things, but also the language is different than it used to be. We noticed that in some of these storms, they said, in these areas, you will experience certain death. you can't make a statement any stronger than that.
Yeah.
You're going to die if you
scary.
stay here.
Right.
And, that doesn't change. I mean, you can only die once. And so,
Yeah.
whether it's a Cat 5 or Cat 6, that doesn't change.
But I'm going to say, I kind of disagree a little bit because I think building codes are so good right now. Some buildings are built so strong that there is the possibility that there are a number of, let's say, cement structure buildings which wouldn't be blown down with a Cat 5 winds of 160 miles an hour, but in fact may be blown down with winds of 190 miles an hour. There's this Wall of Wind organization down in Miami near FIU or on the FIU campus. And apparently they can't generate winds greater than like 100 or 165 miles an hour. So I think being that most of the new homes that are built in Florida are cement structures, cement block, I am curious what it would take to blow down a cement block structure. If 160 be capable or no? If it's not, maybe there's a threshold around 175 or 180. And if so, all of a sudden now, houses that are standing won't be standing.
Right.
So there could be a break point. No?
Jeff, are you reading the comment?
What? I'm not
Are you reading the comments? Because we have somebody, David Faisal said, hey, Jeff, Category 6 would change building codes and the cost of building. So most building codes are at a Category 5 storm. They're built to sustain a Category 5 or 3. Adding a Category 5 would change everything. Is that statement true?
You mean adding a Category 6?
Adding a Category 6, yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, it depends on the laws, right?
Well, yeah, it certainly does. And National Hurricane Center has not indicated any desire to change the scale. But I'm not a building code or structure expert, but I am aware of a paper from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder Boulder, Colorado, by James Stone, who looked at damages in Florida over time and by counties, as looking at building codes. And building codes actually have done a lot. I mean, these are very effective ways of reducing structural damage. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, if you want to build to Cat 5 winds, that's a lot more expensive than Cat 3. But on the other hand, it's always a risk management kind of thing. I mean, how many Cat 5s do you think you're going to have, and how many Cat 6s are you going to have? We haven't had any in the Gulf. Although we're arguing that it is possible.
Right, and that's a good point you make.
Less likely than the Western Pacific. Pardon?
That's a good point to kind of reiterate, which is we haven't had any theoretical Cat 6 yet in the Gulf, but theoretically it is in fact now possible because of the warmer waters.
The conditions have been right for one. We've just been fortunate that a perfect storm didn't happen on those days.
Right. So maybe the wind shear was a little stronger. Maybe there was a little dry air. Maybe there was some land interaction. The point here is we're talking about theoretical potential. Intensity because, we don't know if a real world scenario will shape up where everything will be perfect and it will achieve the greatest maximum winds that it can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm sure Val has another one. You have another one?
Well, this is from me. I'm wondering, will we see waters warm the same that we did last year? Will they be warmer this year in the Atlantic Basin? What are your thoughts, Dr.
Wehner? I don't know that off the top of my head. Last year was absurdly warm globally. And
if it was absurdly warm last year, it's obscenely warm this year. I don't know if obscene I don't know which one's worse, but no, it is the water temperatures are the main development region water temperatures now are what they should be in early July.
Yeah,
they are warmer by far than they were last year.
Wow,
that's disturbing. Yeah. That's very disturbing.
Yeah, in the tropical Atlantic at least.
There's a lot of debate in the scientific literature about why this past year was so above. The average temperatures in recent years. And I don't think we know. El Nino was part of it, but not enough. There's been also a lot of discussion about cleaner shipping. There was some agreement that caused ships to burn to stop burning the really dirty fuels, and that air pollution that they produce is called a sulfate aerosol. You can hit the buzzer when you say that.
She'll
I'm
take it.
buzzing.
Don't encourage her.
I'm buzzing.
You shouldn't do that because she just dying to press that buzzer.
This kind of air pollution tends to be reflective and actually is offsetting the climate change greenhouse gas kind of carbon dioxide effects.
Yeah.
So it has a cooling effect, but by removing this from the shipping industry, there was perhaps a small increase in the ocean temperatures. And that's actually another thing that's really a very hot topic, so to speak, in the climate science community right now. I don't think we have an answer to that. Not what I'm convinced of.
So I have a comment. This is not so much a question. I want to try to verify it with the both of you. It's from Robert Miller, and he says, only one time has it reached 190 mile per hour, and that was in the 1980s.
He's talking about the storm that hit Texas, or I think it had to... I can't remember the name of it, but yes, there was one storm that had winds of 190 miles an hour briefly that traversed the Western Gulf. You know who's going to know this? Amanda Holly. Amanda, what was the name of the hurricane that had winds of 190 miles an hour in the Gulf briefly in 1980 something? Diane.
Wow.
Can you look up Diane for me?
Do you think is that it?
Is that right?
So we actually considered these early storms. This came out in the review process. There were a whole bunch of storms in the Western Pacific in the 1950s that would exceed this 192 mile an hour speed limit. And my initial reaction was that, the way we measure storm intensities has changed over the years a lot. And in fact, we only really wanted to consider the satellite era because once satellites turned on, the quality of the data got a lot better. Even though it's not completely uniform in the satellite era either, but it's good enough. We thought.
I'm looking up right now. I'm gonna bring us up here. Wait a second. I think I may have made up a hurricane by saying Diane. So because Amanda can't find it.
The point being is that the way we measure these storms has changed, and when we applied a correction, again, that Kerry Emanuel developed to these early Cat 6 storms, we find that if we were to measure them today, they wouldn't have been as strong.
Right. So this was 1980. It was Hurricane Allen. And I do remember that now. It's amazing to me that it was the A storm. But basically what you're saying is that probably wasn't true. That we could go back and look at it.
It may have been true, but it wasn't true by the way we describe storms now.
Right.
And so that's what we were trying to do, is try to have something that is some kind of constant way of looking at the storms. And of course, you can't go back in time and redo it, but you can try to make some adjustments for, these changes in methods. And that's what we did. Because that came out of the review process. That was one of the most significant things we had to deal with. It was a good point. I mean, that's what the peer review process is supposed to do, is to make the paper better by alerting you to things you didn't know.
Right.
So Val, one more question, and then I think that's it because we've already gone over time.
Well, I'm not going to lie. The majority are comments, and they're not anything that I can share on air. So I'm just going to keep going.
Wait a second, is this PG? Is this a PG, or can we?
There was something else that I wanted to see. Let me see. You guys can continue talking while I try to find this last one that I wanted to share.
How about this, Michael? How about just introducing the word super? And what I mean by that is, in the Western Pacific, there's super typhoons. Why not just introduce the word super to the Atlantic? Is that too simplistic?
Or maybe super duper, I suppose.
The super duper, super.
I love that.
Well,
That's going to get a congratulatory buzzing.
It has precedent,
super
Val.
Duper. I love it.
Super duper. Okay. But super does have precedent. It actually exists. It's being used right now. We're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, that's true.
Super typhoon Haiyan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And we called Sandy Superstorm Sandy too, actually.
Right. Yeah, it was a different super.
Well, it was only a category 0.
Right.
That's kind of the point. It wasn't even a hurricane strength storm when it
I know.
impacted, and it caused billions of dollars in damage.
That's right.
And so that's, sort of making the point that this Saffir-Simpson scale isn't really
right on
that useful, for individual storms. Now, I just talked to some insurance people, and they actually are very very reliant on some of the legal bits on the category. And so
Well, you remember that
in a way that I didn't understand.
Well, you remember that Sandy, the National Hurricane Center said that as soon as it hit the coast, it was no longer truly a tropical system. And so all of a sudden the insurance companies were like, well, if it wasn't a hurricane, then I don't have to cover you. So yeah, that was a big problem. Do you remember that? I mean, that was the most infuriating thing ever, that because it was declassified, because it was made extra tropical, it wasn't tropical anymore, that it really wasn't a Cat 1 anymore, and it wasn't a hurricane, and therefore they don't have to cover you the same way they would if it was a hurricane.
But I will tell you a Sandy story, and that's involving my son. His fiance lived in Baltimore in the Inner Harbor, and he was very worried about flooding. And he called me up and said, "Dad, what can you tell me?" I said, "I don't know. Let me look at the National Hurricane Center." And I looked at that site, and I could see the storm surge products then were very experimental, but I could see that the risk of high flooding was not in Inner Harbor of Baltimore. It was like 1 or 2 feet of storm surge, and they were quite a bit higher than that. And so, I guess that's an example of how one can utilize these products and to make decisions. So I told him, I said, don't bother to go out and buy sandbags. Instead, just hunker down.
All right. Well, you know what, guys, I think we're out of time.
We are.
But I thought it was a really interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Dr. Wehner, this is I think your 3rd time on the show. I'm going to have to start paying you soon. Val, you're already being paid, so don't even look at me like that, okay?
I can't take it. I can't take it, turns out.
All right, so listen, I want to thank both of you for being a guest today, and I want to bring this up right here. If you want to read more about the article that I wrote based on Dr. Wehner's work, you can read about it on our website, WFLA.com. Go to the Weather tab, and then click Climate Classroom, and there will be an article there, probably the last one, about whether or not we should talk about a hurricane becoming a Category 6 and what is the basis, what's the scientific foundation for that. So again, let me bring you guys up. I want to say thank you to my guests and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And I'll see you again in 1 or 2 weeks from now, and we'll talk about another very interesting climate topic. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye now.
Watch or listen to Jeff's Climate Classroom, powered by Armor View Window and Door on WFLA social media platforms, and find Jeff's climate reports on WFLA.com.